All right, so welcome everybody to our 5th installment of From Brick to Click, Special Education Tips. This is presented by Lighthouse Therapy. I'm Janet Courtney, the CEO of Lighthouse Therapy, and I'm also a speech pathologist. With us today, we have Carolyn Nuttall, we have Katherine Fugate, Ph.D., and we have Frederick Shegog. And we are so excited to be able to offer this next installment for you. So without any further ado, let's get started. So first thing I want to do is I want to talk about specifically IDEA's definition according to them what special education is. And I know we're all special educators or we're familiar with special education, but I just wanted to be clear. You know, special education means specially designed instruction, no cost to parents, and to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And I think this is part of where I think we're all kind of struggling. We want to make sure that we're meeting the unique needs of every student, not just the ones that are easy to work with. And in that, we talk about IEPs and students with 504s, and we're talking to special education teachers and providing that instruction through special education, providing that instruction through related services, providing accommodations, providing modifications, all of those things. How do we do that online? And that's really where our focus is today, is to making sure that we kind of get through that, give you some tips on how to do it, our experiences, and what we can do to make it better. So if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to put them in. We will have time at the end for a Q&A. So feel free to put those questions in the chat box, okay? So let's talk about the assessment validity when you do things online. There are many out there that are saying you can't do any assessments online. And I am here as somebody who's been doing this for 9 years saying that's not true. Initial and 3-year reevaluations can be done online. There are many online schools that have been providing initial assessments and 3-year reevaluations for many, many years. Some of it was done face-to-face with a school psychologist for that psychoeducational evaluation. But even that now, there is a lot of changes going on in that. I know Pearson is changing and allowing some of their assessments online. I know that the Woodcock-Johnson right now, the people at Riverside Insights are making some modifications to that as well to try to get that out. Not consistently yet, but it's definitely opening up, and it's definitely something that is available so we can get those assessments done. And there's many different assessments that are available. Standardized scores can be reported with this method. The big thing about this, though, is you just have to clarify, and we are going to give you the verbiage that Lighthouse Therapy uses in our reports as far as those clarification on the report to say that this test was done online, that we feel that the audio and video was appropriate and that there was someone there to help the child, and who that person was. We want to identify that person, and then say whether or not we agree that this assessment was valid. Obviously, if you're going to report the assessment, you want to, but that's a part of it. You want to say that the assessment is valid, but you can say there was concerns, and that's okay too. I mean, you want to be honest and report what you saw in that assessment. If you feel like some of it, the child was distracted during this particular test, that you feel like this might not have been the best example of what that child did, but we as clinicians and we as teachers and special ed directors have been taught to do diagnostic assessment, clinical thinking, so that we can get those standardized scores out there and available so that the kids can get the services that they need. You can do these assessments on some form of a digital format, via screen share, using a documentation camera. Any of those methods, depending on what you're comfortable with. And I will say that, make sure you practice. If you're going to give an assessment that you've never given before online, practice it. Get somebody. My poor kids have been certainly tested more than they should have been in their lives. But it's great when you have guinea pigs that you can practice on. But do practice, or get with another professional and practice. Make sure you're comfortable with the assessment. Make sure you're comfortable with the way in which you're giving it. So then the next question that I've seen a lot and people have been asking me is, how do I scale? How do I take the lessons that I'm doing with my gen ed classes and scale them for this particular student's needs? A lot of the learning management systems have a way to customize for each student. So if your school has a learning management system that you're using, look in the help regarding how to scale or how to manipulate whatever it is that the assignments that you're doing. But also, if you can't, how did you customize in your own classroom? Can you color code and put kids together in groups based on their abilities and what they have to do? Can you make modifications to the amount and the scope of the assignments that you're asking for them to do? Again, you know, it's all about instructions and communicating with the parents and with the students what they need to do. And also the number of assignments that you're giving the students can be modified as well. So here's some examples of some accommodations that we can do. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're addressing the modifications and accommodations, but I will say that modifications and accommodations that you do in the classroom or in a brick and mortar school are not going to always follow through with what you're doing online. So I've had people ask, are we supposed to be doing IEPs and changing all these IEPs? And the Department of Education has said, no, we don't need to go and reinvent all of these IEPs for online. We know that we're in a crisis. We know that everybody's online. So rather than adding a whole bunch more work for us, they specifically said, no, we don't need to do that right now. So what can we do? For accommodations, we can certainly use closed captioning during live sessions. We were practicing with it the other day on our Hangouts call. It definitely works. It's right there live while you're saying it, and it will put all of those words on the screen. Recordings are really important. I can't emphasize enough how many times I've said, record what you're doing, have it available. This allows the kids to have that repetition. They can go back and hear parts of it again. They can also modify the speed of the recording, how fast or how slow they're hearing you. Classroom notes sent via email. So you have a student that needs to take notes, but they just can't take notes fast enough in your session. Again, they can go back in the recording, but you can also provide those notes for that lesson to them through email. And then obviously modifying the size of the print or how the audio level, how loud or how soft they're hearing you. FM systems are also available, and I have many times had kids with hearing aids where they literally plug in to their hearing aid so that it's being that lesson is being piped right in through their hearing aid. So which makes it even clearer, which is fantastic. And then we're going to be providing you some document examples and resources through Get Educated. They have some really good stuff that we'll be providing at the end of this. And there's lots of, and then I always tell people, think outside the box. You know, what other things can you do for that particular student that will help? You know, get your team together and brainstorm. Talk to that parent, see what they have. Anything that you can do to make sure that you're getting the accommodations as best you can. And then let's talk about modifications. Obviously, easier adjusted grade level for the reading material that you're assigning via a literacy software or whatever it happens to be that you're using for reading. Lexile levels can be chosen on many different software that's out there. And like I always went to Tween Tribune when I was doing comprehension activities with kids, because it's stuff that is relevant and happening today, and it's through the Smithsonian, and they had Lexile levels on there, which was great. So I could just pick which one I needed based on what the child's needs were. And then many of them have that. Alternate assignments can also be provided. You know, if that child's not going to be able to do that particular thing, give them a different assignment. And then obviously voice recognition software. Like I was saying about closed captioning through Hangouts, that the voice recognition software has gotten so much better over the last 10 years. It's amazing. All right, so then let's talk about limitations. there are some limitations to online. You know, we can't sit here and say, oh, everybody can do online. That's not the truth. There are some barriers. Obviously, state testing, even online, schools have the kids go to a particular site for state testing. Although I'm understanding that there is some new companies that are out there that are they're working on state testing in a controlled setting at home. The biggest issue, from what I understand there, is the states have to allow it, and not every state has allowed that. So we'll see. You know, obviously state testing has been set aside for this year, but as things change, it'll be interesting to see what the states do as regarding state testing and what we can do online. Some of the other barriers that you will see for online are blindness. You know, if someone's completely blind, it's a little bit harder to do online. Kids with really severe behaviors will may have more trouble. Some kids do really well. You know, you put them in front of a computer and they have a place to focus, but other kids just don't have the ability to handle this kind of a situation. And then of course there's barriers to access. You know, if they have barriers to how they can access it, or if they don't have internet, or, you know, many different kinds of barriers. Individualized issues may be family limitations, sensitivity to being in front of a computer, direct access difficulties, like I said before. And then let's talk about some solutions that you can have to these limitations. You know, one of the things we can do always is consultation. You know, getting the mom in front of the computer instead of the child, talking about that, you know, having those office hours so that you can work with them and consult with them. Wide-angled lenses are great. People have been asking me a lot about how do you do PT or how do you do OT online, and wide-angled lenses are fantastic for getting a better view of what's happening with that child, and seeing the whole child. Parent training, like I said, and then just think outside the box. Again, you know, you guys are all educators, you're all very intelligent people. Try to think of different ways to overcome some of those limitations. And then this next page is terrible. I'm going to show it to you. But what I did was I wanted them all on here because everybody was asking for resources for specific disabilities. So what I did was I really kind of went out and did some research this week and tried to find at least 2 things per of the most common disabilities that we see, and where you can get specific information to help you. And then at the bottom are some additional resources. And I left the page like this because I want you to have the information. Even if you're not watching us live, I wanted people to have this information. So that's why this page looks like it does. Okay, with that all said, I'm going to transfer over to Katherine Fugate, Ph.D., and she's going to give us some more information. Katherine?
Katherine? Hello?
Yep, we got you.
It's Katherine Fugate.
Oh, Katherine! Oh my goodness, Katherine! Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I combined my 2 professionals. I combined Carolyn and I apologize. Oh my goodness. Katherine Fugate, PhD.
No worries.
So sorry. Holy moly.
No worries. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to point out a few tips for IEP meetings that are being held online and through the virtual reality, if you will. I'm sure that many of you have already been going through this IEP meeting already, but I think it's important as we kind of start to close out technically what the school year would be, to just be aware of a couple of things. It just goes without saying, you've got to make sure that all of your technology issues are worked out before the IEP meeting even begins. Do all the required members and participants have access? Are they all going to be able to participate at the same time? That's just crucial. One thing that a lot of teachers do, and that I have done to really help facilitate the streamlining and the efficacy, if you will, of an IEP meeting, is for the case manager, special ed teacher to meet ahead of time with the parent and student, if it's appropriate for the student to participate, and go over the proposed goals, the draft of the IEP goals. Make sure that it says draft over it, because you don't want to be accused of predetermining any types of services. But this gives the parents a time to read over the goals, ask questions in a much less intimidating format of, 8 or 9 other professionals being all on, looking at everybody at the same time while the parent's trying to read their child's IEP. I think also, in addition to that, I think it's really important to think about who can take the IEP meeting notes, because if the teacher case manager is facilitating the meeting and they're making sure that they're covering all the required elements in the IEP meeting, and they're facilitating the discussions and making sure that only one person is talking at a time, if you can have somebody to actually take the IEP meeting notes, or in Texas we call them deliberations, other than the person facilitating the meeting, I think that works best. And then of course you read the minutes of the meeting prior to closing the meeting out, and then make sure you have a plan that your school, your district has for obtaining parent signatures. What is the methodology on how you're going to make sure that you get the parent signature and all the meeting participants? And this goes along with too, is like, how are you getting signatures, obtaining signatures for procedural safeguards? Because that, first and foremost is you have to have parental signature for the procedural safeguards. So we're going to be publishing, putting out there to you all a sample IEP meeting agenda as the resources that we're providing you. And just one other quick cautionary note, given the fact of the state that we're in with everything being online and virtual, you need to make sure who is recording the meeting. If a parent is recording the meeting, then the school needs to be recording the meeting. Some schools and districts have a policy right now, because everything is online, that the IEP meetings are going to be recorded, and be able to explain to parents that have questions about maintaining the confidentiality and FERPA of their child and their child's IEP meeting. Make sure you can answer those questions, and how that access is very minimized in those plans and for the meeting. Okay, and next slide. Again, I have a top 10, if you will, harkening back to the old days of David Letterman, but I have top 10 recommendations for educators, and these are just a few. Again, baseline, understand the technology. Know the technology that you as the educator are going to be using and implementing and delivering your lessons. And also know and understand the disability of your students and how their disability is going to impact the instruction. Another key point in this too is knowing what the expectations of your campus and or district administration is regarding teaching and teaching students. Because, for example, some schools are requiring that their teachers teach an 8 to 4 day, Monday through Friday. But the family has 3 different children in 3 different grade levels. So and they have 1 computer. So realistically, that's just not going to happen. So you need to know what the expectations are from your school administration, what your family's accessibilities are and accessibilities, and then communicate those gaps. Communicate the gaps between expectation and reality to your administration, and make sure you document everything. You need to, as a teacher, need to document communication with your administrators. You need to document the communication with your children's families. It's very critical. And then just check in with your students on a frequent basis. If you're not providing instruction every day, make sure that you are just checking in with them and on them, letting them know, letting their parents know that you as their teacher are still here, you're available, you want to help, because the kids are getting a little, they're anxious. And if their parents are anxious about their child's learning and the parents are experiencing concerns and feelings of concerns, that those anxieties are also being felt by their children, because they're going to definitely see how their parents are doing. So with that, I think we turn it over to Freddie. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. So next we have Frederick Shegog, and he's going to talk to us about mental health and give us some thoughts on that related to special education. Thanks.
Hello, how's everybody doing today? I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you all for being here. It's an absolute honor and a blessing to share with you some tips about mental health. Quickly, I have a motivational speaking company where I travel and I speak to student bodies on mental health and substance abuse disorder. And one thing I have learned, and it's the first topic here on this slide, is medication, making sure taking them as scheduled. So one of the issues about COVID that I continue to hear from educators and from students, it's very easy to get complacent right now. One of the things is, what's the point, right? Like, it's very easy to not want to take the meds as scheduled. It's very easy to not realize how important the medication is. But one of the things that I've learned in my own journey, because I'm a person that has mental illness and I take medication, is that complacency can lead to horrible results. And it is critical. And it even says that the research has shown it, and all the psychiatrists and the therapists I've ever dealt with have all told me one of the most critical things in this whole fight with mental health is taking the medications on a routine, making sure you take them the same time every day. It doesn't matter if you take them in the morning. It doesn't matter if you take them at night. Regardless, make sure that you take them consistently. And I know with COVID and what we're all going through, it's easy to just get complacent. It's easy to not want to do that. But I just implore and I stress highly that it is important to make sure that the medication is being taken on a regular basis. And with some of the medications, they require being taken with food. Some of the medications, you have to read the bottle and the label, but some of them require that you can't take them on milk or different things. So I would just all implore to make sure you check that. The next thing is, and Catherine had talked about it before, a lot of the things that we've been able to talk about on here, and my colleagues on here have been able to communicate so well, is communication is key, right? Like, a lot of students that I've talked to on a collegiate level and high school level, I feel like the communication between them and their therapist sometimes can become an issue. And I just believe with good communication breeds good results. So I just know, like, the therapist checking in with the students regularly and the parents understanding the child's illness and challenge. A lot of times, and I say this, when I go to the doctor, I like my doctor because I don't talk to just him. There's a team, right? So, like, when there's a team of people, the best decisions are made. But with there being a team, we're all on page A, because if a person's on page A and another person on page B and another person on page C, then it drives the results away. And also, I think it's important too that we understand the environment, how that's affecting the student's mental health. So everybody's environment in their home is different, but I think it's very, very important to understand that the best environment will yield the best results. And I think a lot of times, well, I know for me that when I look back on my history with school, one of the reasons I wasn't doing as well as I could is because my environment wasn't as best as it could be. So I just know those things are important. And then lastly, I want to speak on the conflicts that can occur, right? And how that can lead to not achieving at the highest level. So I know for me, and I able to use myself as an example, just due to the fact that I take meds and I have mental illness. I always had a history of, when school started, for the first 2 months till about midterm, I had straight A's, but then it dropped. And my mom would always wonder, and I've heard a lot of students say to themselves too, like, Freddie, have you ever had the issue where you do real well for the first couple months of the semester, but then as the school year progresses, you start to fade out and you don't get good grades. And yes, and the reason being is because the communication between my therapist and the parent wasn't good. And it had nothing to do with the intelligence level, right? It had nothing to do with whether I understood the material. It came down to the fact that I wasn't being monitored correctly and I wasn't communicating that right. And mental illness, and I want to make sure I get this in, it's not a disgrace, it's a real illness. And I think a lot of times stigma outweighs education in this country. So I think it's very important that we embrace it and that we deal with it, because there are tools and there is proven evidence and there is proven research to where if you take medication if needed, to where if you do a certain health routine and you have a good foundation, you can not only combat it, but you can thrive in it. So I thank you all for giving me the time to share on this, and I'm very grateful to be a part.
Thank you, Freddie. I appreciate it. All right, we went long today, but I want to make sure that we have a few minutes for questions. If you have to leave, I totally understand because we're almost to 1:30, but I would like to open it up for questions now. If anybody has any, please feel free to type them in the chat box and we will answer as many as we can. And while I'm giving people a minute to type, we can show you the other slides and make sure we get those in so that you can see them. Maybe, yeah, there we go. So if you need additional support or time, please feel free to reach out to me, and this is the calendar link to my calendar specifically. The others in the webinar have also made themselves available through yeah, here we go. So there's my email, there's Frederick's email, there's Carolyn's email, and Katherine's email. So if you have specific questions for them, please feel free to reach out to them. They want to help as well, and they'll be glad to answer your questions. We have one more webinar left. Oh, additional resources. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. I'll go back to that one. That's fine. So these are best practices for securing your virtual classroom. And then also these are the other webinars that we've done so far. So you can go back and they're all available on the Lighthouse YouTube channel. So those are the links to those if you want to see something or miss something. And if you see something and have resources that you didn't get, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to provide those to you as well. And then the last week, next week is our last week. We will be doing online related services, specifically talking about speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral mental health, BCBA, PT, online. How does that look? How do you make it work? And specifically how Lighthouse therapy can help as well. So that's our last one. So we've got a couple of questions. Knowing the student's home situation may not be the best and going to the school was a relief, so to speak. How can we best support a client like this? Yeah, you know, one thing you have to make sure that the child is okay. You know, obviously we want to make sure that the child is okay and that everything is, you know, that they're fed and that they're well. And if not, we have to get social services involved and unfortunately, some of these kids are not getting what they need, and that's sad. And there isn't a whole lot we can do, but we are mandated reporters. So, but also just continuing to reach out to that parent, trying to get, if it's a student that can talk to you on the phone, if it's a student that can email you, check in regularly with them, even if it's daily. Doing everything you can within your power to get that child the services they need. Certainly. The next question is, you mentioned virtual testing as a Woodcock-Johnson. Any social work assessments? I'm not 100% sure. Pearson definitely has quite a few assessments out there. I can do some research for you, but I know that there are quite a few that are online questionnaires. WPS has online questionnaires. Let's see, who else? I'm missing one. We have a list. We definitely have, PAR. PAR I Connect also has many assessments online as well. And the other thing is like I said, if you can't do the assessment online, you can certainly get yourself a documentation camera and give it that way. You know, if you can have a screen share where you're sharing the screen, or you can have that documentation camera pointing directly at the whatever that assessment tablet or plate is. Make sure that it's, again, practice, make sure that they can see it well, and do it that way. And like I said, I'll give you the wording for what you're going to want to say in that report to say that, yes, we gave this online, and we understand that it's not, quote, standardized, but you can still get a good indication of where that child is functioning. Next one says, I'd like to share that Google Voice is yes, absolutely. Google Voice is fantastic. And they have a text-to-speech. That's great. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think on our first webinar, the first email I sent out, I think we did share a link to Google Voice. So if you guys would like that again, or if someone needs that, please let me know, because it's definitely, I use Google Voice for years and years. So I didn't have to give my personal phone number, and I didn't have to give out my cell phone number, and yeah. So
can I interject?
Yeah, sure, Catherine. Go ahead.
Catherine. Yeah. So regarding the testing, like the Woodcock-Johnson or whatever, you have to be real careful with a lot of those assessments, because they do require that somebody with a license is the one that administers those tests,
right.
Especially like the WIS, the Works Intelligence Skill for Children, also certain parts of the Woodcock-Johnson. You have to be a licensed professional to even purchase those materials. And
right.
yeah, so that's one thing to be cognizant of. But the other thing I want to stress to everybody is that teachers are going to have to start doing some summative assessments. And the reason why I say that is because we're going to be starting to get into the time period where parents are going to expect compensatory services for their child, and their child's going to need compensatory services, quite honestly. So you need to start thinking about, okay, which test can I give to see where they're at based on their IEP goals? And it needs to be almost like an apples to apples comparison, because if you used one test, let's say the DIBELS at the beginning of the year, and then you use the DRA at the end of the year, those are two different assessments, and they're not necessarily looking at the same thing. So start working with your administration, your school district, etc., about, okay, how are we going to assess and plan for students who regress and recoupment? And I am actually working on some of that stuff right now that I can that I'll be sharing at some point.
Yeah, and along with that too, with the statement that I will send out to you, it specifically states in that statement that this test was given by a licensed or certified professional, and what that professional's title is. So yeah, I agree 100%, Catherine. It has to be given by somebody. But let's not get stuck on paralysis of analysis. I just, it disturbs me when I'm like, none of these kids are getting assessed. They need to be assessed. We understand that it's not perfect, but we are all professionals that understand diagnostic assessment. Even if you give a standardized score, you're always, as a professional, going to go beyond just that score. That score is not that child. The score gives you where they qualify, maybe, or not, but it doesn't give you what they can and cannot do. And that's what we as professionals are doing when we interpret that test. We're not just giving a score. We're talking about what that child could do and what they did well and what that child couldn't do and where we need to work. And that's the point of the assessment, is to find out where that child's functioning so we can help them to learn. So with that, I'm going to stop, because I will just go on and get on my soapbox, and I don't want to do that. So thank you, everybody, for coming in. I apologize that we ran over, but I hope you find this information helpful, and I hope that you guys get something out of this that can help you to serve your kids. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for attending, and we hope to see you next week. Take care.